And sometimes you'll catch it mid-word. It's like, actually, I mean this. And then other times you might catch it.
Absolute vodka.
I mean, it's a way to go. Hello, 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 and welcome to Well Shit. It really is that simple. I'm Claire.
And I'm Serena. On this podcast, we help you to understand about your 12 universal needs, why they are currently not being well met,
how to meet them in ways that work for you, and how to consistently do so in quick, easy, and simple ways that fit seamlessly into your life.
We'll also help you to understand how doing so will have a positive ripple effect in literally every area of your life.
If you like what you hear, sign up for more support with meeting your needs with your weekly Universal Needs notes at theuniversalneeds.com.
And enjoy the show.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, everyone.
And I had to check we were recording. We are. So it's all good. We can carry on going. I just had a moment of like, did we hit record? We've been here so many times. Let's not do that whole record an entire episode and then realize we didn't hit record again.
They're always gold too.
I know, right?
Like, oh, that was the best episode ever.
We didn't hit record. Oh my goodness. How are you doing?
Doing good. Busy.
Busy.
Yes. Full time with the universal needs.
Yay.
So lots going on there, and travel planning, which we're both kind of in that.
Yeah, vacation time. I'm really super excited because it means I get to see my family again because I've not seen them in nearly a year. In fact, it's probably over a year now. Thinking about it, like looking at the date, it's over a year since I left.
Wow.
So it's more than a year since I've seen my family. So which is probably the longest I've ever gone without seeing them. So I'm super excited to go and hang out with my family and the kids. And it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun.
I'm excited for you.
Yeah, me too. So today we are talking about something that a lot of people do in their day-to-day language.
Something we did.
Oh my goodness.
And we realized, wait a minute.
I was about to say all the time. Mm-hmm. Interesting that I was about to use that terminology. So today we're talking about absolutes. And absolutes when we're talking about language, like when we're using absolute language within what we're saying. Now, probably helpful to say, well, what on earth are you talking about? What are absolutes? So absolutes are things that create a definitiveness around a statement that you're making. So you want to give some of the examples of some of the words that are absolute words?
Absolutely.
She says, having just said before we started recording, I never use the word absolutely.
We were discussing this, and it's interesting because the actual word absolutely isn't something that's really in my vocabulary, but abso-fucking-lutely is. So much so that if I try to type just absolute into my phone, it autocorrects to abso-fucking-lutely.
Well, the funny thing is that it's interesting that I'm someone who's trying to remove absolutes from my language because absolutely is actually a word I use to talk, and absolutely is in it of itself an absolute. So like one of the things that
you don't say.
I don't know what the clue was. I mean, where's the hint there? So anyway, you want to give some of the words that they're absolute?
Some of the ones we most commonly see, always. I mean, like.
Sorry, I thought you were saying some of the words we commonly see always. I thought that was your sentence. I'm like, you're using it in the sentence to talk about the sentence. Sorry, I'll stop.
Because it's so
prevalent. It's used a lot of the time.
Yes, which is not an absolute.
There we go.
Never. Everything, or just
everyone,
every day. Mm-hmm. Every is a lot. Like even just saying it's like every can be so many things.
Overwhelming.
Along with all. Mm-hmm. All the time. All of you. All can be so big. I'm making big arms. None.
Yeah. None.
Like, how many times is it really?
None.
None.
Yeah.
Or only. Mm-hmm. and one that we had talked about using, and we're going to go on into a little bit of nuance and that kind of stuff in this episode, but must.
Right.
Must is one, there's a lot more nuance around it than some of the other ones, but you must do this.
Yeah, that's a very absolute statement. And actually, because I kind of interrupted, I want to make sure that we really emphasize the fact that always is one of them, because always is a term that is used a lot of the time by a lot of people. Like, I can imagine some people going, who cares? Why are we talking about this right now?
It's like they must be lacking some episodes.
Right, yeah. Like, one thing I can guarantee you, we are not short of content. That's for sure. The reason that we're bringing this up is because this can sometimes compromise needs. And it's very interesting because...
I'm gonna actually... This can often, not even just sometimes, and it's not always, but... more often than not, throwing in the absolute is not really what you mean. So,
absolutely.
I don't know if I see what you did there, or should I be saying, do you know what you did there?
What's really funny was it was halfway out of my mouth before I was like, oh, actually, I'm going to use this right now. I could have, and here's the thing, I could have corrected myself. And that's what we tend to do, is that when we're noticing language that's not helpful, that we will start to, like, sometimes you might catch it after you've said it. I'm like, hold on a second, that's not really what I meant. And sometimes you'll catch it mid-word. It's like, actually, I mean this. And then other times you might catch it.
Absolute vodka.
I mean, it's a way to go. So why do absolutes compromise needs? Well, the thing about it is that what can sometimes happen when we're using absolute language is that it can reinforce beliefs, it can reinforce behavior. So, for example, if you say that I've just thought of another couple of absolutes. I'm thinking of examples now. Things like don't or can't are also absolutes. One of the things that comes to my mind is that when I'm dealing with clients, when they say to me, "Oh, I can't do blah 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 blah," and I always add the word yet into that sentence, because when you say I can't do this, you're reinforcing that belief that you can't do it, which makes it actually that much harder for you to actually do that. And normally those are the things that come up around the things that we really want to start doing, like habits we want to create, changes we want to make. And so when the Y word is sometimes a really great antidote to using the absolutes. So it's like, I can't do that yet. Leaves room for the possibility that we're going to be able to learn, that we're going to be able to grow. Also things like even when it comes down to needs. So it's like, you must meet your needs. Yes, we would say needs are a must. That's one of the things that we talk about. And when you think about them in terms of survival needs, and actually like drinking, oxygen is a need. We must have oxygen if we want to survive. So yes, there are situations in which they are a must. But for example, if you say to somebody, you have to meet all 12 of your universal needs every day. So I've used two absolutes in that statement. I have to do all 12 needs, and I have to do it every single day. All of a sudden, there's this weight and this pressure that comes with that. And what that does is that weight and pressure actually makes it harder for you to do the things that you need to do in order to meet your needs. Another time that these things come up frequently, as somebody who I worked as a relationship specialist for about 7 or 8 years, and these things come up a lot of the time in relationship conflict and relationship challenges. So if you think about it, if somebody says, "Oh, you always do this," that can, and it happens frequently. A lot of people use this language. What that can do is it can be invalidating to the other person, or it could devalue the other person. And it's like, you're not being seen, you're not being acknowledged. It can compromise your acknowledgement need. It could hit your emotional experience expression need, because it's like, well, that's not true. And the reality is that you are always in a situation, she says. What's so funny is I've actually squirreled myself by using an absolute, and I don't actually remember what the sentence was that I was going to say anymore. When it comes to these things, when we put these into relationship situations, for example, where we are using absolutes, is that it makes it very difficult for you to find common ground, for you to connect, for you to communicate well, because a lot of the time it looks like you're tarring somebody with a single brush, and that's who they are, and that's all they are, it's all they ever are, and it's all they ever will be. That makes it very difficult for them to change, and it may be that change is one of the things that they need in order to meet their needs better. The other thing is it makes it really, really difficult for people to take what is actually meant for them and leave what isn't, because the reality is that, especially when it comes to the sort of things that we do, when we talk about like the personal development space, and you get a lot of these absolutes showing up in inspirational quotes, in inspirational videos, and in advice and guidance that some people in the personal development space make. The thing is that because I'm trying to think of an example now of a quote of like you always have to do this, or never do this, or only do this, for example. Now, it may be that is helpful 90% of the time. But if you are in a situation where that is not helpful, actually, it could guide you in the wrong direction. And we did a podcast recently where we were talking about toxic positivity. And it may be like, if simple example of using an absolute, always look on the bright side. How many times have we heard that? There's a freaking song about it, for goodness sake. Like, always look on the bright. No, I mean, and sometimes it can be helpful. What?
I kind of wanted to see where you were gonna all jazz hands, and
like the elbows come up. Like it feels like that's like a Cockney kind of song for me, and the elbows feel like they need to come up. Anyway. You look at something like always look at the bright side of life. Now, there are times when it is very helpful to look on the bright side. There are times, as we were talking about recently, where that's toxic positivity. You don't want to look at the bright side of life. Actually, it's helpful to look at what's real and what's in front of you as part of your processing. So that's an example where we're using an absolute and actually it could invite somebody to compromise their needs. And where we have so much conditioning around these sorts of things, like good vibes only, positive vibes only, great examples of absolutes that are actually very toxic and very unhelpful, because I don't know anybody who is only good vibes all the time. I don't know anybody that is only positive vibes all the time. And anyone who seems like they're that, I'm probably not going to spend any time around, because you don't seem real, you don't seem human, and you're not somebody who I'm probably going to vibe with and relate to. The other thing that's really a big issue when it comes to these sorts of languages is that a lot of the time when we're, especially again, relating it specifically to the personal development space and the kind of stuff that we do, is that when you make something absolute and you make it a definitive, this is what you need to do. This is what everybody needs to do. This is how everybody needs to deal with things. This is what you always need to do. You never need to do this. The challenge with those things is that these approaches tend to be very exclusionary, because what they tend to do is they tend to focus on the majority, and I'm using that in like my little bunny quotes, and the default people, which tend to be white, straight, cisgendered, able-bodied, sort of middle-class people. That's where most of that is directed, or it's designed with those people in mind. Well, in actual fact, there's a lot of people that sit outside of that. So I'm trying to think of a stupid example, and I can't think of one off the top of my head. Like, oh, always go and take a walk when you're feeling down. Well, if you're somebody who's in a wheelchair and you can't take a walk, that is exclusionary. If you have a chronic illness and you cannot get out of bed, that is exclusionary. And it's one of the things that we've been very mindful of with the universal needs work, is that even when we've been going through and we've been doing the slide decks, when we've been going through and we've been working on the workbook, when we've put the needs nudges out in the community, when we do the December self-care calendar most years, where it's like a different thing to do each day. And we had some things in there where it's like, hold on a second, that doesn't work for all people. We have to find a way of doing this so that it is accessible and that more people can access it. But the challenge is that if something is created with a specific kind of person in mind, but it's languaged as if this is for everybody at all times, in all situations, then people can end up applying it at times when it's not appropriate and not helpful to do so. And I mean, we see this all the time in what we do, right?
Don't say absolutely. Don't say absolutely. Don't
you know,
say
so I said all the time.
And it's something...
It's part of common language.
It's part of common language. And this is, you know, it happens like this. And this is kind of how it happened with us. Like,
right.
you're experiencing it. It's like, you know, we're trying.
In
it's
real
like,
time.
Real time. And it's like, okay, like, what's the replacement word? And eventually, we hope to get to the point where it's our natural. Common language. And it's natural for us to just, like, I never say never. Like,
right.
It reminds me, I mean, a really kind of odd example is when I was younger, my aunt and uncle had a minivan. And I mean, I was really young, and they still have said minivan, which is kind of weird. Like this, it won't die. Yeah. And I was like, I will never have a minivan. Like, I will never be that type of person. And I haven't had a minivan. I have had kind of the kid carrier type of car. But as I've gotten older, I'm like, and my aunt always said, never say never. And I'm like, actually, I can see where that would come in handy. And it's like, even something that silly and that like kind of insignificant, it's like, yeah, no, I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring.
Well, and it's like, and the thing about it is that sometimes what that does is it creates internal blocks for the things that will meet your needs. I've got another really, really silly example. Sometimes they're the best.
Well, and actually, just to tag on for a second, like, it was in my head, like, I'm never going to get a minivan. So if I all of a sudden...
That's where I was going.
...created a family, or it was in a situation where I needed...
needs.
It met my needs in the most realistic way to get a minivan, I would have fought it tooth and nail, being like, no, I said I would never do it, so I'm never going to do it. Like,
and that's one of the ways in which it can compromise. Oh, you're in my head today. Normally it's the other way around. Is it cozy in my head too?
It is.
Yeah. But that's exactly where I was going with this. And again, I've got a very silly example. But I remember when I was young, when I was a very young child, I had I didn't like custard until I was 5 years old. It was one of those things. I didn't like custard until I was 5 years old. My sister, as we were growing up, she had it in her head. She knew, it had obviously come up in conversation, that I didn't like custard until I was 5 years old. So she had it in her head that she was not going to like custard until she was 5 years old. And the day of her 5th birthday, she had some custard, and sure as hell, she liked it. It was great. She loved custard at that point. She'd never tried custard until that point because she had it in her head she wasn't going to like custard. I don't like custard. I will not like custard until I am 5. So at that point, her reality actually became in alignment with what she believed. And because she believed that I'm somebody, I don't like custard currently, she didn't try custard. Chances are she probably would have liked it at 4.5. Probably at 4. Who knows? She may have liked it at 2. We don't know. We'll never know. But that's because she had this absolute around it. It's, I don't like custard. And that's the thing is that so often is it creates these internal barriers to doing things that might meet our needs. So like that, going back to the like always look on the bright side of life kind of thing, if you flip that around, like never look at the dark side of life, and I'm not saying that that's a saying, but there are a lot of sayings out there that are kind of similar to that. They've got that kind of like I said, like the good vibes only kind of thing. What it does is it blocks us from doing the things sometimes that we actually need. It's one of those situations where what you tend to find with people is that because we're into this kind of common language thing, in the sense that we pick up language without even realizing we're doing it. We say things without even realizing we're saying them. But quite often when we say things, we hear them. And when we hear them, it forms beliefs for us about how we are, who we are, what we do, what we don't do. And that can really put us it can pigeonhole us and restrict us from things that otherwise would meet our needs in different circumstances. And like, again, like I got a kind of silly example. Like I didn't like olives. I don't like olives for a long time. And then somebody gave me, I think it was tapenade from Whole Foods. Other tapenades are available. And they served it on like a warm, crusty bread straight from the oven. And that's one of my Achilles heels. It's especially problematic for somebody who has a gluten intolerance. But I remember eating it and I was like, oh, this is quite nice actually. But I wouldn't, it was only because they pushed me to try it and they were like, try this one. It's a little different. Now I eat olives like candy. I never would have done that previously, but because I don't like olives, even just something like that, because
the don't in there is...
it's absolutely, I haven't liked olives in the past is a very different statement. And there are different ways of changing it. And it's the reason, like for us, like very rarely, she says, having used many absolutes in this one podcast alone, but I try to be very mindful, especially when I'm working with clients, especially when I'm delivering content, of resisting the habit of using always, never, all, none, only, because so frequently there are exceptions. And the exceptions and the nuance is so important to needs. We're gonna do a podcast at some point on the nuance of needs, because she says, one podcast. How many could we do? I mean, is the nuance which really the needs comes to life. And the exceptions are sometimes what are needed. And if you don't allow for exceptions, and the absolutes don't allow for exceptions, it's the whole point of it being an absolute, is that the need for there to be the presence of an exception means that you can always make choice about what is right for you. And if you're making choice, you are in your personal power need. If you're not making choice because you believe you don't, can't, always, never, all those sorts of things, chances are you're not choosing, do I want to do this or do I want to do that? Here's the way that feels right and in alignment for me and my needs at this point in time. And that's one of the ways that we can compromise our needs.
And something to kind of go back to, you had mentioned the toxic positivity episode, is that these absolutes also set those expectations and those bars that we were talking about in that episode, where you're trying to live up to the absolute.
Right.
And because we're not in a absolute world,
and it's exhausting to do that. Like if you even just something simple, like I always have to have a clean lawn. Always. Like
I always, it's even something like I always drink a cup of water in the morning.
Right.
The day that you don't drink your cup of water, then all of a sudden you're impacting your own belief system, and it's like, oh, and then you kind of go in, like there's potential to go into a hole or a spiral.
Right.
Or,
like I've let myself down. I haven't met my needs and blah, blah, blah. And it's interesting because like when I actually started to develop the needs program, it's funny, the very first page where I started to look at the ways of meeting my foundation function need. And it was interesting because there were a lot of absolutes on that page. There are also a lot of minimums on that page where it's like, I have to sleep for 8 hours. I have to meditate at least 20 minutes a day. I have to practice yoga 30 minutes a day. I have to drink 2 liters of water a day. I have to it was like, and again, have to, I have to do this. I have to do that. I have to do the other. And it was like, there was no wiggle room in that. And I was halfway through the first page about my first need, of which there are 12, and I'm exhausted at the thought of it. And it's the reason that the way that we work with our needs now is we actually do it the exact opposite, where it's like, how do we make doing this, how do we take the pressure off? How do we make it feel easier? How do we make it feel lighter? And those absolutes often add some of that pressure and some of that heaviness. Now, the one thing I will say is everything in moderation, including moderation, which means that we want to generally try to lose the absolutes, but we might not want to lose them absolutely, because there are some times when absolutes can be helpful. So for example, when we're talking about like social justice stuff, it's not it's never okay to be a racist asshole. Like that is an absolute that I will stand by. Like I am okay with that because I believe that to be true. I don't believe there is ever a situation where that is a good idea and that is something that is beneficial to me, to anybody else in the world. So that is an absolute. So, and this is the thing is that it's not about, the irony is like we want to absolutely lose the absolutes, but not necessarily absolutely.
Wrap your brain around that one.
Because we always want to be, and here's the key. The key to this is mindfulness. We want to be mindful and intentional about what we are saying and why we are saying it. So there are going to be occasions where I will deliberately use an absolute because I mean it. It's like, this is never okay. This is always important. For example, those are some of the things that I will use because that's true. But it's the mindfulness around them, and it's the mindfulness about the habit, because the habit tends to be the absolutes. We tend to use absolutes as a habit. So what we want to do is we want to start to kind of break that habit a little bit and get more into the habit of actually checking in and do I mean always? Do I mean never? And especially when it comes to like when we're dealing with other people, when we're dealing with conflict, when we're dealing with challenges. If I say the other challenge with using absolutes is that, and it's one of the reasons that I actually do this with this work as well, is that one of the challenges with absolutes is if somebody else can find an exception, it undermines everything that you've said. And it means that their trust in what you've said and their trust in you as a result will start to diminish. So if I say, you always have to do this, and somebody comes up to me and goes, what about in this situation? I go, well, yeah, not in that situation. Well, all of a sudden, I lose credibility in that situation. Same thing if we're talking, like if I say to Serena, oh, you never do this. And she was like, I did it that one time 2 months ago.
That was something in my relationship with my husband, Joe, like taking the absolutes out of our conversations, you know, especially when, let's say dishes. Dishes was always a revolving thing with us where like that was one of the points where we always seemed to, we hadn't figured it out yet. And it was like, you never do this. And he's like, well, fuck off. Watch what never is. Like, right. and that wasn't the conversation, but that was, you know.
Some of the energy behind it.
And it's like, no. And creating the picture of somebody else as never doing this, as always being this. You can also create a false picture of yourself within your own brain. Like, I never do this. Like, I never do harm.
Right.
I never want to do harm. Yes. I believe that's an absolute I can stick next to is like, I never want to do harm to somebody. I never want to traumatize somebody. Have I? Yes. Will I in the future? Unfortunately, yes.
And here's the other thing that's the issue with absolutes is that when it's especially about who we are, I never do this. The thing about it is, if you say, I never do this, it stops our vigilance around that thing. And what it means, it's actually easier for us to sometimes slip into those bad behaviors without realizing that we've done it because we have the self-image of the fact that we are somebody who never does that. So say, for example, I'm someone who never swears. We know that's not true. I'm not even going to even suggest that you say this.
I tried it for a while. It didn't work
work out so well. There's a reason this has an explicit label on it as a podcast.
You guys, I'm sorry, just a random aside. At one point we were trying to avoid the explicit label, but apparently shit outdid that for us, even with an asterisk.
Yes. Yeah.
But the amount of ducks you guys were about to hear, like we had a quack.
Yes.
And that, like,
you might have noticed actually very early on in the podcast, for the first I think maybe three or four episodes, there's a quack that's like kind of censoring when we were swearing. And because it was a duck instead of a fuck. And the funny thing is that we got to the point of like, this is not going to work. This is not us. Like we want to be natural. We want to be real. We want to be human.
And sometimes that comes with a potty mouth.
Exactly. So let's use the example of like, I never swear. If I'm someone, I don't believe I ever swear. If I get super angry, I'm not going to think about that. I'm not even going to be paying attention to it. I'm not going to be paying attention to like, where are the situations where I might need to be mindful of my language? and this might not be the best example because I know there are some people who've conditioned themselves out of using certain language. This might not be the best example. But it's easier for you for something to slip out because you're not paying attention. If I know I'm somebody who I can have a potty mouth on occasions, if I'm in certain situations, I know I need to watch that. And I know I need to be mindful and I need to be conscious of the choices that I'm making. The same thing is that I've seen it a lot with men who say, I always respect women. Always respect women. This is a very
common one.
Very common. I always respect women. Because they have this self-image of somebody who always respects women, they're not even stopping to think about the situations in which maybe they don't. Maybe the jokes.
That maybe they're not even telling, but they're laughing at.
Exactly. Or not even laughing at, but just not saying, oh, that's not cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's lose that one, shall we? And that's the thing is that even just staying silent in that situation, that's not respecting women. But because there's these kind of layers of nuance in it that people are not thinking about because the image is I'm somebody who always respects women. And because they see themselves that way, they're not looking for the places where maybe they aren't. And they're not looking for the places where maybe some shifting or changing or tweaking would be helpful. And as is true of anyone with any kind of privilege and anyone with, that's a particularly important one because often our privilege keeps the places in which we are engaging with our privilege hidden to us. Like they're like the blind spots in a car. Like we can't see them unless we go look for them because we've been taught to ignore them or taught that they're not there. So we don't have to pay attention to them. And so this is the thing is that so often if we're using these absolutes is that it stops us from being conscious about our choices in terms of our language, in terms of our actions, in terms of our behavior.
I also think a lot of times using absolutes kind of gives people the feeling of entitlement or privilege to be a certain way because, I always do this. Like, yes, we'll go back to my potty mouth because I can speak to that. I generally spice my daily dish with a couple of fucks. It's just who I am. However, I go into a work situation, podcast excluded, I am not going to be fucking about, literally.
Right. Literally. Because
in being like, well, I swear, I always swear, this is just who I am. Like,
yeah.
No, it's not an excuse. The absolute is not an excuse.
Right. It doesn't mean that you don't have to be mindful about the choices that you make and the impact that has to your needs and other people's needs. Because in that context, like if you were in certain corporate environments where that's not okay, it could compromise your needs because your job could be at risk. Likewise, if you are around, to say children, for example, and that's something that would be detrimental to them to be around, and there are different schools of thought on this. I'm not saying yes or no, right or wrong, which is the right way. But if say this is like that behavior, that language, well, okay, let's use another example of language that actually is harmful. We did the episode on the C word, where that is a language that is harmful to somebody else. But if you're not even aware of the fact that you use I never use harmful language, well, that stops you paying attention and checking whether what you're doing is harmful. If you want to know what the C word is that we're talking about, go and listen to that episode. I will put the link to it in the show notes. But that's one where it's like I'm saying something and it is actually harming another person. That's going to impact their needs. It's going to impact your needs because of the interconnectedness. And so this is like, there are so many examples of how these seemingly innocuous things, these seemingly irrelevant or unimportant things can actually be subtly, but very powerfully influencing us and affecting the way that we're meeting our needs and the way that we may be compromising the needs of others. And because we are talking a lot of the time and because we are using certain words without realizing that we're doing it, because we're not being mindful about what we're saying and how we're saying it, we cannot then make conscious choice about changing it and doing things in a way that are actually going to be supportive for us. So for example, I would say I meet my needs every day. I do meet my needs every day because everything you do every second of every day is done to meet your needs. So I am meeting my needs every day. Now, if I was to say my intention is to do my needs practice most days, or my intention is to do my needs practice every day, that's very different to I do my needs practice every day. Because if I say I do my needs practice every day and then I don't, I'm making myself a liar. So I'm going to feel bad about myself, which compromises maybe my value need. Or it might push me to do my needs practice on a day when actually what I need to do is rest. So I could compromise my foundation function need because I want to be in alignment with this self-image that I have that is in alignment with that absolute. So yeah, I mean, this shows up so many places.
It really does. And I want to say, like, as you've heard on this very podcast, like, it's a work in progress for us. Like, it's difficult to change the language that you've
been used to using for a long time.
Right. And it's, you know, sometimes it's the catch in the middle. Sometimes it's the catch after. And, you know, especially with the C word, those replacement words, like having those ready. Like, okay, I don't mean always. I mean some of the time. I mean my intention. Or, you know, like the different words you can place in and having those ready and being like, oh, is that what I mean? Like, what am I usually thinking of when I say the word never? And being like, well, I normally mean this. And trying to cultivate that as the word that comes out.
And obviously one of the things that meets our needs is our relationships and our connections and our community. And the other thing is that one of the things that you can do to step out of that absolute space and also create a space where you're more likely to be able, excuse me, I've got a hiccup, where you're more likely to be able to communicate, discuss, work together, find common ground, and navigate through a potentially conflict situation of conflict, is to say, rather than you never do this or you always do this, like how I would often phrase it was like, it seems to me like this is happening a lot. It seems to me now, I will actually sometimes qualify it and say that I may be wrong. Like if you can, like if feel free to challenge me on this. If you don't agree with what I'm saying, I wanted to, because it may just be that I'm perceiving it a certain way, and there's a different, there is an alternative way to view it, which would be more helpful. And that alone, it automatically takes it out of that accusatory, you are never doing this, you are always doing this. It's a way of offering, here's my perspective. This is how it seems to me. How does it seem to you? Because it may be that it seems differently to you. And that then opens up the space for dialogue, right? Oh, I didn't know. I'm really like sad to hear that that's how it seems to you. This is how it seems to me. Like, what is it that is one of us not seeing something? Are we just not communicating when we're doing something? Like, it opens up a dialogue space, which is so important to have constructive, supportive, and mutually beneficial relationships.
Well, and the people that can, you know, if I'm doing my absolutes and all of a sudden, not the absolute way, Claire and I will be like, do you everything or some of the things? Or, you know, like in offering, and you have to be in communication and relationship where that is what you've cultivated together. But having somebody to be able to be like, oh, that does, you know, Claire, one of the techniques we use, especially around the C word, is, oh, that does sound intense. Like, and offering another phrase.
Yeah. An alternative one. The other thing is that a great way of navigating around that is questions. And even if you're not in close connection with somebody, questions can be a great way to navigate through that. Like, is it really always? I'm just curious. Like, is it really always? I'm like, that's not how it seems to me, but I'm just curious. Is it always? Is it true that never happens? Like, and I do this a lot with clients. I do it a lot with Serena. Like, maybe we're talking about, she's talking about somebody else and she'll use an absolute, and I'll be like, really, never? Like, is that like, and oh, actually no, like most of the time. And again, that qualification, most of the time, what it does, it brings you back into dealing with reality, because a lot of the time the absolutes also, they shift our perception of what's happening in the real world. So it's like, I might have a viewpoint of the fact that an ex of mine always did this and never did that. And they now have that image in my head, and I'm going to relate to that image of them rather than actually noticing what they're really doing and not doing. And that can get in the way of the connections and the communication. Same thing with Serena. If I thought Serena was somebody who, Here's a good example. So I could easily say, Serena's always late. Now, the truth is, that's not true. Now, it might seem like she's always late because she is often late. But actually, she's often late, but she communicates and tells me that she's going to be a few minutes late because she needs to do something to prioritize her needs, which is actually going to benefit the situation that we're in. So if I stop the sentence that Serena's always late, it actually doesn't reflect, and it's not representative of who she is and how she shows up. Now, what I can say is frequently she's not here at the time that we decided we were going to start. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that surrounds that, the communication, the respect, the fact that we've had conversations and I'm like, I would far rather you show up 10 minutes later, caffeinated, than on time and not caffeinated, if that's what you feel you need that day to be able to do what we're doing. Like, we've had those conversations. And I think that sometimes the absolutes, they can dilute the truth of what's really going on, and it prevents us from really acknowledging the full picture and responding to that real picture.
Well, and that's actually a really good example because that's the truth. And if Claire was presenting me to other people and even to herself as always late, then maybe I wouldn't be like, oh, she's always like, oh, well, now I can't be late at all. And I would end up in the past compromising my needs. Yeah. And, then the coffee, like, I don't need coffee. I like coffee and I choose to drink it because I enjoy it. And there are days that I would like that extra caffeinated boost. Yeah. And on the days that I do show up a little bit later, like we said, we usually communicate about it, or, Claire will be like, get your coffee this morning. I understand where the timing is. If I come uncaffeinated, what we're going to get done is going to be so much less than if I had taken that time, those couple of minutes.
And it also means that what I can do is I can communicate around it as well. And if I'm like, she's always late, well, if I really need her to be on time one day for a particular purpose, she's always late. There's no point that like, immediately that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. But I know I could say to Serena, I really need you here at this time today. And I know that sometimes, like, is that possible for you to be able to? And I know that in those situations, because most of the time I'm fluid and flexible about it, she would be like, absolutely.
Yes. And that is an absolute that it's like, yes, you are specifically asking. I will absolutely make sure. Well, actually,
I will absolutely do everything in my power to attempt to be there at time. So I will leave earlier than I normally do. And if there's an accident on the bridge, or there's heavy traffic, or there's an accident, there's a police diversion, or my car stops working, like, again, like, it's like, what's the absolute? And again, like, let's deal with the truth, because if Serena said to me, I will absolutely be there on time, and then she wasn't, but it was outside of her capacity or to be her ability to actually determine whether or not that was going to happen or not. I mean, yeah, she wanted to absolutely be here on time. She could say to me, yeah, Claire, I'll stay with you the night before. Then I'm definitely going to be there at night. And it may be that there are certain situations where it's like, if I got a flight to catch or something, I might do that because that's the only way I know that I'm definitely going to be able to do that. But the reality is that it means that we can have a conversation about it where we're going to deal with the truth, which is, the truth is, I'll do everything in my power to be there on time that day. The only reason I will not be there is if something happens that's beyond my control. And again, only is another absolute, but that is an honest response, because sickness, car failure, I mean, there's a number of things that could happen. Life happens.
Life.
Absolutely. And that's the funny thing, is that sometimes that she might, and the irony is she might show up on time that day. I might be late that day because something's happened at my end too. And I think that's the thing, is that all of these things, I think the thing with absolutes is they reduce our ability to connect to our humanity and our humanness and our wholeness. And we are not always the same thing. We're not Stepford wives. We're not robots. We're not always going to do something. We're not never going to do something. We're not going to do something all of the time or every time. Like, we're human, and human involves exception. Human involves nuance. And I think that the more we can step out of the things that move us away from our humanity and from our realness, and absolutes are one of the things that do that. And the more we can get rid of that and instead return back to being real and whole and messy and imperfect, from my experience, that is always that's always more in alignment. That is more often more in alignment with getting your needs consistently met. Anything you want to add?
No, I will go off on a tangent, so I will save it for notes and a future episode.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I just want to reiterate what Serena said. Notice that we're not perfect. And notice that we are human. And I've caught myself a number of times today because it's still a language pattern that I'm in the habit of. And if you notice the fact I've caught myself, that is part of my process in trying to change this. Same thing as Serena has as well. So we invite you to be human with this process as well, the same as we are. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. Remember, between now and next time, to stay safe and continue to meet your needs. Lots of love. Bye.
Bye, friends.
That's it for today.
If you like what you heard
and would like to see some of Serena's awesome facial expressions,
check out the video podcast on YouTube.
And remember, the less absolutes we have in our lives, the more human it invites us to be.
Well, shit. It really is that simple.